What if the problem isn't that people stop talking about God? What if the problem is they stop listening to him? Because that's exactly what we see in Judges 17 and 18. Let's see what happens. Good morning, family. It's time for your morning juice. Now, before we get to Micah and his shrine, let's talk about his mother for a second, because the whole story really starts with her. Micah stole 1,100 pieces of silver from his mother. She discovered it was missing and pronounced a curse. At some point, Micah heard about this curse and returns the money. Then something strange happened. His mother says, "The Lord bless you, my son." And if you're reading this carefully, you're probably thinking, wait a minute, didn't she just curse him? Then it gets strange. She says she's dedicating the silver to the Lord. Okay. But some of that same silver is used to make an idol. Did you catch that? Money dedicated to the Lord becomes an idol. How does that happen? Somewhere along the way, actually said, Micah builds a shrine, creates idols, install his own priest. That's right. He hires a priest and creates a version of worship that fits his situation. Not because he hates God, but because he's doing what seems right to him. And that's the warning repeated throughout Judges. Everyone did what was right in their own eyes. Then a tribe of Dan enters the story. And what's interesting is that Dan already had land assigned to them. God had already given them an inheritance. The problem wasn't provision. The problem was possession. Taking the land would require faith, courage, effort, and trusting God. So instead of fighting for what God had already assigned to them, they started looking for something easier. And while they're searching, they find Micah's priest. Then they make a bigger offer. He will have more influence, more responsibility, a bigger audience, and a bigger opportunity. And let's be honest, most of us would at least be tempted. But not every opportunity is from God. Sometimes a bigger opportunity can pull us away from what God originally called us to do. The Levite now has a decision to make. Stay where he is or take the better offer. And he leaves. This issue wasn't the money. The issue was rather his convictions moved every time a better opportunity came along. And that's still a good question for us today. What would it take for me to compromise? What would it take for me to ignore something I know is right? Is it money, comfort, recognition, influence? The truth is, convictions don't mean much if they disappear whenever life offers us something better. Truth isn't for sale. Dan doesn't stop there. They take Micah's idol. They take the priest. They attack a peaceful city called Laish, a city living quietly, a city expecting peace, a city that wasn't looking for trouble. And after all the damage they created, they simply move on. And that still happens today. People damage relationships. People damage families. They damage churches, damage friendships, and then act surprised when people are hurt. Actions have consequences, and sometimes the damage we create lasts longer than we expected. And that's really the story of Judges 17 and 18. Micah chooses what seems right. The Levite chooses the better offer. Dan chooses the easier path. Everybody was making decisions. Everybody was talking about God, but very few people stopped and asked, what does God actually want? And that's the question worth asking ourselves. Am I following God, or am I simply doing what seems right to me? Because easy isn't always right. Convenient isn't always obedient. And just because something makes sense doesn't mean God is in it. So before we point at Micah, before we point at the Levite, before we point at Dan, maybe we should ask that same question. Where am I choosing what's easy instead of what's right? Sip on that, family, and I'll talk with you tomorrow. Listen, if these morning juices are blessing you, please make sure you like, subscribe, and share.